we've got very nice program today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the census that's been sent around, just a summary of what we found so far. We've got a headline from Nick today about the recently published regulation of AI's medical device report that was published by the Regulatory Horizons Council. And then we've got our 3-minute about me's. So today we've got Elisa Rauseo and Jonathan Nash giving our intros. And then we've got our guest speakers today, Baptiste, Vasey and Lauren Morgan, talking about the Decide AI reporting guidelines. And then we will finish on time with a couple of sort of AOBs, and we'll introduce you to the next meeting. So as always, put things in the chat, raise your hands. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And we'll kick off, I think, with a quick summary of the census. Alicia, do you want to go ahead with that?
Do you want me to, Zal? Just a quick summary for people. It's still open at the minute, and I think it's in the chat, or it's in the calendar invite anyway. So for those of you that are with us this evening or joining, or you have friends or colleagues that are members and maybe haven't filled it in, please do encourage everybody to fill it in. It's a quick question. There's 6 questions in there about what data science AI methods you're particularly interested in, what areas of clinical specialty you're interested in, and also ideas for we're proposing into the new year launching a number of specialist super groups or groups on a particular theme. So we are looking for different ideas, and then we'll start with those areas. And then there's a very last question about how we're running it, and what we've got in the content, and what to think about how we structure it as well. So there's a huge range of specialties. We're looking at, actually, we've got about 250 people that are registered members of the group, huge breadth of clinical areas, which is fantastic, and expertise in academia, NHS, industry, lots of different roles as well too. So do fill it in. We want this to work for all of us as part of a bigger community. So we'll feed back then whenever we've got everybody's responses in. I think we're up to about 46, and I think we can do a lot better than that. So yeah, do fill it in, have your say. That's it, I think, Sal.
Yep, and Emma's just popped the link in the chat if anybody hasn't seen the email. Great. And now I'll hand over to Nick to talk about the regulation of AI's medical device report.
Brilliant. Thanks, Al. Yes, I feel like for the headline section, we should have some kind of, I don't know, some like newscaster music or something like, they do have at the beginning of BBC News or something. But anyway, we don't have that. But one of the big things that's happened since we last met in November, and in fact, actually, so Professor Alice Dennison, who was a key author of this report, is a member of the interest group. So this was written by the Regulatory Horizons Council, and for anyone who doesn't know about that, it's basically a group of experts that advise the government on different elements of regulation within technology and innovation. So one of the next things that they'll move on to after this one, which was looking at artificial intelligence as a medical device, is hydrogen-powered maritime vehicles, and the regulation of those. So it's a really interesting group, and it's clearly a lot of big cheeses there. But here it's a really well-written report, and actually, it's quite a big subject, and it's quite a big report at about 70 pages as well, but it's really well written. And one of the things, although I'll just run through some of the headlines here, is that actually it goes into quite a lot of detail about how to structure a regulatory framework, lots of elements of safety as well, and plenty of stuff that was a real education for me. And I think it's going to be really important moving forward. So some of the key things looking forward from the report is that the regulatory system needs to have capacity, capability and agility, and essentially that the MHRA needs to be adequately funded in order to be able to see the swathes of new applications that are coming through in this area. But also that a kind of regulatory framework moving forward needs to make sure that AI as a medical device is safe, effective, and equitable. So some big areas there. That it's also that the regulatory framework itself is open and transparent and also incorporates in the opinions of patients and members of the public. But also that the UK kind of positions itself in this way as a leader in patient safety and innovation. And the foreword is actually written by Lord Aradasi, and there's this brilliant soundbite which I thought I'd just read out in full, which is: regulation needs to be efficient and sufficient, grounded in the reality of today whilst being ready for tomorrow. So you can see, I mean, that's some pretty powerful stuff. You can see why he's ended up in the House of Lords. But it's a really good report. Definitely recommend checking it out. And I'll pop a link for it into the chat as well, if it's not already there. And with that, if we move on to the Elisa with the 3-minute introductions.
Thanks, Nick. What a quote. That's fantastic. I might steal that for I will say it's his, but for other things another time. Oh, brilliant. I need to have a read. Right, 3 minutes by me. And I'm going to keep people to time and not fill it myself. So first up is Elisa, who is a Turing enrichment student. I hope you're there, Elisa. I haven't popped you a line on chat.
Hi.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
hi, Elisa.
yeah.
Welcome. So
you.
over to you. The floor is yours. All about you for 3 minutes.
Okay, I will try to be within 3 minutes. So, hello everyone. My name is Elisa. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Queen Mary University of London, and I've been working on the application of artificial intelligence in cardiovascular medicine. I have a background in cardiology, and I have developed over the last years of my PhD journey some skills in data science. In October 2022, I have been awarded the Community Enrichment Scheme within the Alan Turing Institute, with the aim of enrich my PhD research by learning more about new methodology and machine learning techniques, and also starting collaboration with other researchers within the Turing. Regarding my research, is focused on the application of machine learning techniques to improve diagnosis and predict outcome of cardiovascular diseases. Specifically, I've been working on risk stratification of heart failure and its predisposing conditions, such as hypertension, using several techniques, specifically unsupervised machine learning. And my goal is to use clinical data combined with conventional and advanced imaging metrics to improve risk stratification of this heterogeneous condition and identify individuals at higher risk of developing adverse cardiovascular condition so that we can provide them with personalized and preventative strategies. I have joined the Clinical AI Interest Group because I'm quite interested in collaborating with projects involving AI in medicine in general, not just in cardiology. And I'm excited to be part of this group and to work on projects that can probably have a real impact on people's lives. So thanks for having me here, and I look forward to start some collaboration with you soon.
Lovely, thanks, Elisa. What's the best way to get in touch with you if people want to link up? What would you like from the network? Is it links into clinical data or imaging data, clinicians or machine learning experts? What would you like?
As I said, my background is I'm a cardiologist, but at the same time, I have skills in data science. So for me, it would be ideal to work on projects where I can offer not only my clinical input and my clinical interpretation of data, but at the same time on methodology, because I mean, that is the important thing of having both skills.
Brilliant. So yeah, so if you want to pop in the chat how to get in touch with you, if you
I can put my email,
or on the SharePoint site as well too, then just reach out. Fab, thanks Elisa. So next up's Jonathan Nash from Kheiron Medical.
Hello.
Jonathan's there. Brilliant. Hi Jonathan. Over to you.
May I rudely share? I've got some slides to help me remember because I can't remember.
Yeah, keep you to time.
Thank you. So I'm going to gallop through these. There we go. Great. So I'm Jonathan Nash. I'm the medical director for UK and Ireland at Kheiron. Before that, I'd been working as a breast screening radiologist in the NHS for 11 years. I was director of that service for a little bit as well, and worked on the National Advisory Committee for the NHSBSP for the last year. I had a background in digital transformation, both at my local trust and for our consortium, leading the breast imaging IT. I joined Kheiron in September last year with a primary focus of delivering the NHS AAC and NIHR AI and Healthcare Award that the company won in 2020. And my main roles are in product development, medical affairs. I'm the clinical safety officer, and a lot of partnership work with the network I have. Ooh, can't hear that. Here's the Kheiron team. This is us in Wales. This was actually quite a hard time for us back in June. We had just lost our Series B funding had collapsed. So at this point, we'd just lost nearly half the company. But this is the hard core of people who was, most of whom were still there. What we do is we produce an AI product that is developed specifically for breast screening, and fundamentally it is about making a recall decision or recommendation for women coming through normal breast screening. It can also indicate where areas of interest are, but it's mainly about whether you should recall or not. Kheiron did a large multi-center study back in 2020. It was retrospective, working across sites in Hungary and the UK, over 180,000 women with 250,000 cases, looking at the same sorts of metrics as we would use in breast screening. It showed that the AI was at least as good, if not better, than most of the human workflows. I mentioned about the award it won. It was one of the winners of the phase 4, round 1 phase 4 awards, winning £15 million for a 3-year study to try and build up an evidence base for wide-scale deployment. That's also guided by the National Screening Committee, who periodically observe what's going on in the evidence in the literature to try and decide when is the right time to say it's okay to go with AI. What are we doing? We've got a large retrospective study between 3 distributed sites in the UK for generalizability. We've got a prospective study starting in spring in Leeds, looking at how behavior changes with an AI, and we're just about to start a service evaluation in Aberdeen to build up an idea of how workflows might be influenced by an AI. We've also got multiple site deployments, which are service evaluations at local level, auditing, live data processing. We have a patient and public involvement board. I chair a clinical advisory group, and we also work with University Hospitals Birmingham as a commercial partner to help shape the things we do in the award. Tricky things, it's only a 3-year award, which is quite a lot to do in 3 years. Although the AAC did hope that we'd be able to get commercialization, nobody really wants to sign up for a product that isn't proven. And certainly the NHS England is not the same as the NHS BSP in their attitudes to whether this should go ahead or not. Every site has a different approach to information governance. We've had COVID. Teams have fears about even more work to do. There are local governance challenges. Even different countries in the NHS BSP have different quality assurance frameworks. The National Breast Screening outside of Scotland has a system that's 40 years old that we need to try and interface with. And as we saw from that earlier photograph, a startup company is subject to some resilience issues if the money disappears. What are we going to do next? We're going to keep working to generate as much performance data as possible. get the conversation going on the ground, build up the relationships with the national bodies, work with the local teams so they get an idea of what the concept and the product might be, and try to agree ethical frameworks with people like NICE and the commissioners to get to a point where we might get longer term commissioning. I think that's about it. So that was a bit of a rapid.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Right through. Could I stick to 3 minutes?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, you did. Thanks, Jonathan. And same question to you, but hopefully with the clinical AI group here, it'll help provide kind of a route into all of those different groups that you were reflecting on. Yeah,
that's why I hope we're obviously working very much at the front in a field that Dan Bamford at NHS England tells us it's like building flying a plane that you're building as you're going, and it's very much like that, not only with developing the product in the deployment but also in the whole regulatory framework. So plugging into that both as a provider and a recipient of that information is really important for us. We have conversations about ethical approaches and challenges that the data sets we have access to might give us for a population-wide program, and that's very live. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks.
So how do you want people to get in touch with you if they're interested or want to learn more?
I'll put my email in.
Fab. Lovely. Nice introduction there, spanning chronic diseases. Zhao, back to you now.
Yeah, cool. So we've got our guest speakers today. We've got Baptiste, Vasey and Lauren Morgan, who are both authors of Decide AI, which is a reporting guideline for early stage feasibility studies for clinical decision support tools such as AI. And there's a really strong focus in this paper on human factors, computer AI interaction. And so we're really delighted that you could both join us today. I think we're getting a two-part talk. So Baptiste is going to talk a bit about Decide AI, and Lauren is an expert in human factors research and is going to talk a bit more generally about human factors. So I'm going to hand over to you. Really excited about your talk.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. My name is Baptiste. I'm a surgical resident in Geneva in Switzerland. And I'm also in parallel PhD student for a few more weeks at Oxford University under the supervision of Lauren and also Professor McCulloch. I'll just try to share the screen to start. Okay. Can you see the slide okay? Yes, perfect. All right, so today's presentation will be around 7 minutes from me about Decide AI and the guideline we developed. And then Lauren will take over for another 7 minutes, talking about human factors and human factors evaluation in clinical settings. And hopefully that will leave us 5 to 6 minutes for question at the end. So first of all, why and where did we start from with the development of Decide AI? We identify a few problems at the beginning of my PhD. And the first one, I think, is quite well represented in these slides from a group from the Netherlands mainly that looked at ICU publication of AI application in the ICU setting. And what you'd say is with time, we have more and more publication at the stage of model prototyping and model developments, but whereas we would expect a desired movement towards more clinical outcome evaluation, this has not happened, at least in the last years. And there are, of course, many reasons for that. But one we hypothesized was that clinical evaluation and clinical implementation is quite a bit harder than preclinical and prototyping evaluation, prototype evaluation, and that the field might be lacking guidance in this field for this transition. Another problem that was highlighted by several reviews already is the high heterogeneity and sometimes low quality of reporting in the field of clinical AI. And that's just a few examples. There's the BMJ review by Nagendran and colleagues, and one from our own groups looking at the association between clinician diagnostic performance with and without use of machine learning-based decision support system. So we started looking at, well, any help we could get from other fields. to help us improve the guidance of this early phase, or at least this transition from pre-clinical development to clinical testing of clinical AI. And here, bit of luck, as often in research, I was in Professor Maculus' lab that has been working on the IDEAL framework for several years, aimed at, well, providing guidance for the development and evaluation of surgical innovation as a complex type of intervention. And here we can see a few parallels between AI and surgery. First of all, as I said, they're both complex intervention. They also have to account not only for patient variability in the way they evaluate their system, but also about who is using or applying the new intervention. So in surgery, well, operators and operator viability play a big role in the performance of the procedures being used. And we saw some parallel with AI where users, and here I give an example, if you have a user which has been exposed to digital technology in the past, users that are more or less trusting in digital technology, or more or less advanced in their clinical training, might react differently to any AI decision support recommendation. Surgical innovation also has an early phase of modification. When you introduce a new procedures, you tweak it and change it bit by bit, as would AI, not only with iterative designs at the beginning for innovations, but also in the case of continuous learning. So if we started to look at the bigger picture and see how those other guidelines would help us fill a gap in the current pathway of clinical AI evaluation. And here there were a few other players already present in the field, and I think, Consort AI should be quite well known to many of you in the group. But Tripod AI and Start AI was also in development, focusing more on the early stage, on the preclinical stage of development. And here in the middle was this gap that we thought would be worth looking at and filling, which is the early phase clinical evaluation. So when moving for the first time in clinics before any larger comparative evaluation. So how did we do that? We started large consensus process, starting the small steering group, but then inviting over 150 experts to participate in the Delphi, closing with a consensus meeting in June, over a year ago. And as I said, that's one of the broadest consensus so far for an AI, clinical AI guidelines. We had representative of approximately 20 stakeholder groups. As you can see on this group, there was some mismatch between the numbers of representatives on each of these stakeholder groups, but we tried to take that into account all along the way and broke down the scores for each of those stakeholders group to see if there was any big differences in opinions, in order to not let, well, clinician and engineers in this case take over the discussion. The result of this process was a joint publication in the BMJ and Nature Medicine, the Decide AI guidelines. We even got a logo to which Chao gave us a little help with the last part of it. And this is the guidelines articulated between some core general good research practice in gray on the screen, and some more AI specific items, the white one on the screen. Roughly, we can group the key components of the guidelines into 4 main topics. The first one is all information needed for a fair and transparent assessment of the performance of the AI models. And well, here we can, for example, note the introduction of ethics and algorithmic fairness information. You might know that some model correct for bias, for interesting bias in the healthcare system, and that might impact on the performance. Often it might also decrease slightly the performance, but then it's only fair for these groups and the developers using ethics methodology that this is also clearly reported by them and by other competitors, sometimes not using those methods. We have a strong focus on safety as well, and here the the guidelines highlights definition of errors, analysis of those errors, and any mitigation strategy taken. Again, important at this early stage of development to correct them before moving to larger evaluation, reaching more patients. Human factors is an important part of the guidelines, but here I will leave Lauren say a few more words. But at the moment, regulators ask for human factor evaluation of medical devices, but mainly in the preclinical phase. And here we're trying to make, well, the guidelines in the consensus group made a clear point that this human factor evaluation should continue in early clinical stage, because different aspects of and problems might arise at that point that should also be reported. Last but not least, the role of this early stage evaluation as a stepping stone to a larger trial. Early stage and proof of concept doesn't mean effectiveness, and it's important to develop and to give the key information for those larger trials before the design of study protocols. I see my time running out, so I'll skip on the last slide, which is the next steps. I'm happy to come back to that after in the Q&A time. Over to you, Lauren.
Sorry, it took me a second to realise how to unmute. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm Lauren Morgan. I've worked with Baptiste and a few of you others, and I've been working in this field for a little while now. Anyone interested in that, we can have a chat about that at a later date. So I guess where I'm starting is this idea of why human factors, and I think Baptiste's work is kind of quite unique in the centering of it, in the level of detail that it has, and I'm really proud and pleased to see that there. And for those of you that can speak Welsh, you can read the Welsh bit. For those of you that can't, you can read the English bit. But I think, so my car is that one with the kayak in the background, and I couldn't resist taking this photo in the summer holidays because to me, it just shows that design is powerful, right? And humans will follow the path of least resistance. And so we need to be so aware of that in our designs. And that makes me really mindful of door designs, you know, how many of these, and the thing is that when we interact with this bad design, it often leaves us feeling stupid. So when you go to use a door, and when you're pulling it, but it's actually a push door, you feel like a bit of an idiot yourself, but you have to rain check that and go, actually, if everyone else is having a problem with this door, the problem's with the door, right? Not with the human. And the fact is that we've got these things built into our IT systems all of the time. So I'm based within a hospital and I see not just badly designed doors, but absolutely horrendously designed IT systems throughout the hospital. I think, so Charles Perrow writes this really nice stuff about normal accident theory and about looking back after incidents. And that last sentence, so user error should be seen as a function of poorly designed systems rather than human idiocy. And I think that bit is really important because we can get really pleased and I guess confident with our designs, and then afterwards kind of blame the users a little bit if they're not getting up to speed with it, but that being a really big signal that we've got something wrong. So I guess the question is, can you predict this in the design phase? And that's really what the human factors stuff that's in the guidelines and in the science itself is asking. And so for those of you that are not familiar, so human factors in design is considering that usability at all stages of the design. And really there's sort of two parts to this. So can the system harm the person? And that's kind of number one, and that's really important. And there's two people or two user groups to mainly consider in terms of the kind of clinical trials. And also, can the person harm the system? So what can your user do in terms of making a difference into your piece of kit? So what the guideline asks us to do is to consider different parts of usability testing. And so I've reflected on the pretty old but pretty useful ISO guidance around this, and what it says is look at your system and consider usability in terms of these three main outputs, so effectiveness, efficiency and satisfaction. And what I would recommend is that we are replicating our system of use as much as we can to be able to test these outcomes. So we're not testing in labs with young people in a perfect environment. Actually, we're testing in the real clinical environment. So what does testing the effectiveness looks like? Well, how well does it do what it should? How efficient is it? How satisfied is the end user? And some work that we've done on that really suggests that we need to be using validated scales for that, which as scientists you're not surprised about, but we were amazed at the number of papers that just took, you know, some positive quotes from users as the satisfaction data, and that's all they were really reporting on in terms of usability. And I'd also say for the kind of stuff that this group is involved in, that the mental workload is really important, and that impacts the learnability of this. So there's a validated tool that's really useful for this, which is the NASA TLX stuff, and it's pretty easy to use. So the three things that I think are the most important to take note of is the context. So what's the context of use? And by this, I mean the real context of use. So I took this photo when I was driving into my local hospital trust a couple of days ago, and there's 15 ambulances lined up outside. So they're queuing on the entrance road. So you can see where the entrance to ED is down there. I think we need to be really mindful of this in terms of testing what we are going to be deploying and the kind of system into which we're deploying it into, and what that means for our users. What tasks is your tech looking to support, and do you really understand it, or do you have this idea of a solution and you're trying to sort of figure around for the task that's supporting it? So I think that bit for me is really key, and sometimes really lacking when we look at the AI. It's kind of solving a problem that's not really there within the clinical environment. And so making sure that that task for that end user is really well understood. And those environments and the users, who are they, and where will they use it? So, you know, taking into account the age of our user population and sex of our user population, is actually usable in the spaces that they've got to use it. And so I'll finish on the end point of this slide. So this is the other side of it's kind of across the top. So the sign told us that that wasn't a proper footpath and we should use the proper footpath, but the proper footpath hasn't actually been built yet. And for me, that kind of sums up what we're doing with sort of designing some of our systems in terms of our usability, is we'll tell people that they're doing the wrong thing, but we haven't actually made it easy for them to do the right thing. So I guess the HF ask in this, or the human factors ask in this, is make sure we've paved the right path before we tell them off. So that's me. I think I stuck to time. I hope I did.
That was brilliant. No, thank you. I think you were perfectly on time. But even if you had talked for longer, we would have loved it, because that was really, really interesting. So open to comments, questions, reflections. I've got a couple that I've noted down. In the meantime, maybe I can get us started. I think it's just a really as a sort of reflection, Lauren, you mentioned at the end about making it easy for people to sort of do the right thing, or do the thing that you're hoping that they would do. And it's funny, because reporting guidelines are also kind of about that as well. It's about creating a template and an instruction for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the methodology, or aren't as familiar with the evidence standards, to be able to easily know what the bar to hit is. So that's just quite an interesting reflection there. I wondered whether you both had any thoughts on, in the field of sort of, you know, AI applications for health, do you think there are specific use cases or certain areas or subspecialties that you think where this is really needed? If we look across, you know, the types of algorithms that are being developed, do you think that there's any where this is really pertinent, and or are there any where this is maybe less relevant, or is it just the same across the board?
Well, that's a trick question, because you're almost sure to offend one of the specialty when you answer this. But I think screening is a big one. And I think, well, the presentation we had just before answered that quite well. When you have a large amount of tasks to complete, which are and here again, don't want to offend anyone, relatively similar in the sense you have like one question at the end, like recall, not recall, or do you need to go to a further appointment, yes or no? That could be very useful, or maybe at least in the first stage of AI development. I'm quite convinced that we might have AI solution as well for more complex questions in the futures, but for that we'll need more and more complex data sets and more complete data sets as well.
I thought you were going to ask a different question, and your question went in a different direction. I thought you were going to ask, are there specific use cases or specific user groups that we could be testing every AI and every system on? And I think that's where we could make it easy for people to do the right thing. So we could have test environments that we know replicate the challenges of a clinical environment, and have scenarios that these AIs have to go through, and have users and with skills or ability levels that we know that are replicable of some of our users, and make that easy. So in hospital design that I get involved in, those are some kind of things that I'm trying to get into the hospital design. So we know we're going to have a crash call, so let's put a crash call in every environment and let's see what happens in those environments. And I think we could do a similar kind of thing in this, is, you know, let's do some of the groundwork, but you know, that's a research project in itself, isn't it, to set that up? But I think it could be really, really fruitful in terms of future design work.
That's super interesting. I see we have a hand up, Rebecca.
Hi, thanks. It was a great talk. I'm Rebecca. I'm a dermatologist, and I also lead for AI at the British Association of Dermatologists. And I'm really interested in this issue around human factors. And I think it's really so important for our clinical practice. But I think one of the things, and I think you just sort of highlighted this, Lauren, is that people don't really understand how you're supposed to kind of measure these things. So basically, we know it's really important. People talk about it, but then we're not really experts in being able to actually assess it. So it never really gets done properly. We've been looking at usability for sort of skin cancer diagnostic apps, and basically no one does anything. So there are all of these apps that are out there that are public facing. There's nothing published around usability, and they don't last very long because basically they're not very user friendly. And so I suppose my question is, how do you see us moving to a position where there are people who are more skilled, or who do we kind of call on in order to help us to kind of develop these technologies to make sure that they are thinking about human factors as part of the development process?
I mean, call on me, but
yes, but you're only one person. This is like every specialty.
I'll put my email address in the thing. But I think that it's a really growing field, and I think you've hit the nail on the head in that when we review the papers about usability studies, they're so poor what they're doing. You know, I kind of threw out stratification and said user system usability scale. It's super old, but at least it's validated compared to just getting some standard chat about what you think something is, and, you know, taking the top 3 samples of what someone said and using that as your backup. I think the MHRA guidance is really lacking, actually, so I do think we need a bit of backup there in terms of what they're asking us to do. It's different, and I think having a skill set of people to be able to do this. So we didn't suddenly decide, so a group of doctors didn't suddenly decide that they were going to be able to code a load of, some did, but didn't decide they were going to be able to do all the coding. You know, they brought developers in and they brought different skill sets in. So it's about going, there is this skill set out there, let's bring them in rather than try and do it ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, agree. Thank you.
Nick.
Hi, thanks, and thanks Baptiste and Lauren as well. I was really interested in the mental workload element, and it's something that that I remember thinking about when I was doing OSCE examining at a medical school, and just I was doing a PGCE at the time. I had to write this essay about something, and I really felt the exertion of mental workload by the end of a full day of OSCE examining. And it made me think about the clinical workplace and how different it is, say, sitting in the middle of a ward trying to write, you know, alarms going off, people coming over to you, asking questions, and the mental workload associated with that. And obviously, when we talk about AI and algorithms and their use in clinical practice, we always emphasize the fact that ultimately the decision that is made that affects the patient is the responsibility of the clinician, and it may be guided by the artificial intelligence, but ultimately the burden of responsibility falls with the clinician. And I just wondered, within the kind of the mental workload element, like how actually realistic that is. Like if you're in that kind of environment, you've got very little mental capacity and something is giving you an answer. Is it realistic to think that people are then really interrogating that to kind of own the answer and take true responsibility for it?
It's a very good question, and I think yes, it is realistic, because that's what you do with any other test, any other information provided to you in a medical context, right? If a nurse is coming to you and say, "Oh, this patient, I don't know, I think their hands or feet are getting cold," you have to interpret this information. You have to make your own opinion and then to assess it for yourself. And the AI would do exactly the same, provide you with one more piece of information, which hopefully will be good and relevant. But that's why this IDI puts such a strong emphasis on human factor testing and performance testing in real clinical context, because it's easy to test that cold-headed and in a research setting. It's something else to interpret those information and to make your own opinion in this hectic live clinical context that you described.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. It's an important similarity to draw with, decision making based on other things. I do wonder whether in those situations as well, how much mental capacity is able, or is and I don't know what the literature is. I don't know whether anyone else does about the effect of mental workload, perhaps using. I hadn't come across. I didn't know about the NASA tool, Lauren. What kind of things does that look at?
So it tests all different kinds of workload. So how frustrated you are, how much you feel that you're under time pressure, how difficult you're finding the decision. And so and your physical exertion. So it tests all those different things and then kind of gives you can weight it if you use it really, if you use it in earnest. So you can weight which one you're more interested in. So you might not be very interested in physical workload at all. So you might weight that really download, but the raw stuff works just as well where everything works. And with all this stuff, you're using it to test your iterations, aren't you? So it doesn't really matter as long as you've got whatever you use, you're keeping it standardized throughout. So I think NASA's a really easy to pick up tool that anyone can kind of use a little bit and get a bit of a feel for it. So it's just a questionnaire that you administer to the user. So I would be administering it sort of partway through a test and at the end of the test, and then you've got a set of data, and it's just a start. It gets you thinking about this stuff. You might find some stuff out that you don't know about it. I've put in the slides about the ironies, in the notes about the ironies of automation by Nizam Bainbridge, and that's a super old paper. But it talks about keeping the human in the loop for this decision making. And I think that's the really important bit here. So is it realistic to ask them to make a decision only if they're in the loop of understanding what's going on? And it's when they're not that it's really, the mental workload then is really challenging. So, when the sat nav takes you off track and you're like, I don't know what the hell you're doing here. But if it goes, there's a big queue ahead, do you want this other route because it's a shortcut? And you're like, yeah, okay, I'm cool with that. So you can make quick decisions as long as you're kept in the loop. And that paper's from like the 70s, but it talks about that human in the loop stuff. And when you look at all the automation stuff now and the AI stuff, I think that's becoming more and more relevant.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really, I love a retro paper as well, so definitely check that out. I can see a queue of hands, so I'm gonna mute.
Am I next? I think I'm next in this queue of hands.
I was just really interested in the point that someone made about measurement and whether there's value in linking with other. So there are evaluation frameworks from NICE in terms of digital health technology and how you can better evaluate the implementation of digital health tech in, this isn't specifically AI, but it thinks about bringing in the decision makers and how do you implement that tech in a health and care system. So I was just wondering about the Decide AI framework and how that might link with, you know, the how NICE assesses and MHRA might assess actually the usability and all the really important things. You can have a fantastic tool, but if it doesn't get implemented, it's never going to be used, so it's useless. So I'm just wondering in what your thoughts were on that.
So we tried from the beginning to have we made the difference between scientific evaluation and regulatory evaluation, right? From the beginning, Decide AI was more focused on scientific evaluation, but we put a lot of attention from the beginning to have it as much aligned with other regulatory requirement as possible, because of course, that's a very good point. If what developers are mainly looking at least in the first stage, is to get the products they're developing approved, and not necessarily except if money is flowing, to get a fully proper scientifically evaluated product. But the point we're also trying to make is, and I think that also came in the presentation earlier by Jonathan, is that if you want buy-in from medical professionals that are used to look at evidence to base a decision and the choices, scientific evaluation is almost as important as regulatory evaluation or requirements, and that's why we try to align as much as possible, but still to make a point that sometimes scientific evaluation requires a few more or a few different aspects than the regulatory ones.
That's great. Let's go to Sophia.
I have 2 points. The first being like expanding on the discussion for the NASA task load index. So my background's neuroscience, and I was kind of coming from usability testing when it comes to virtual reality and different implementation. And I had thought we completely moved away from the NASA task load index due to kind of the issues around reliability and validity of cognitive load measures. It was thrown out, sorry, not thrown out, it was a little bit too strong. When we were doing a brain-computer interface study in pilots with JPL and some NASA folk, and they were heavily discouraging us from using it. So I wasn't, kind of their first point there is not sure if, like, is that still widely used kind of over here, or is that, have you seen anything come in to replace it from that kind of suitability, usability and usefulness standpoint? That's kind of my first question.
Can I answer that one first, and then you can ask your next one, so that my brain remembers the first question. I think there's lots of things in terms of human factors that we could be using that are way more up to date. Are they entry level? No. Where we're starting from is like literally people writing their usability that they've taken the subjective response from the users, and they've tested on 18-year-old white males and they love it, and that's what their paper says. So like, we're here, we need to be like 3 blocks down. Is NASA a logical stepping stone for us? I think it probably is. If you're putting in a research project right now, would I be encouraging you to use it? Absolutely not. But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think that actually, does it give us does it have face validity, like in terms of testing and iteration? I think it does. I think it links with the other stuff that we've got. So I think it's a fairly usable tool and gets at some of what we're getting at. Is there better stuff out there? Absolutely. That would be my answer on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a helpful insight. I think the second question was more of, do you have a heuristic of, in the same way that like ISO 14971 with human factors and the quality management system for medical devices, whether those be class 2 or class 3, kind of have that risk register of human factors all the way through. But from the guidance so far, I haven't seen it treated in the same way when it comes to using software as a medical device versus implantables. And I was just wondering, do you ever have a kind of a heuristic, an idea of where should we be heading when it comes to the implementation of human factors as a process when it comes to software as a medical device, clinical AI kind of being the prime example?
I'm going to say it might be the fact that I've got a sick kid and I've had 2 hours sleep, but I don't fully understand the question. I'm really sorry. Do you mean where in the process does it fit in, or?
I guess it was probably a poorly worded question on my part, so please, I'll take that blame fully.
I'm so tired.
I guess because human factors comes in with traditional implantable medical devices, 2A, 2B, and class 3 devices, being that it has to be acknowledged in design, deployment, and your risk register. You have to match everything back through a quality management system and QA back to the user needs, and also what you did to prove those user needs, and also prove them at the end of the thing, the testing. So human factors is this kind of embedded process, whereas from the kind of processes I've read with clinical AI and deployment software as a medical device, it's could your users use this interface at the end? Did you test? Maybe did you iterate once? Great, let's ship, let's deploy, as opposed to a kind of iterative process. And as obviously human factors is so important from that entire design process, I was wondering if you had this heuristic of, would we potentially see a QMS quality management system like you see for implantables, but for clinical AI software, address the same human factors issues as it was for implantables? Was kind of the wordier version of my question.
I think you've answered your. I think you've answered your. I think you set it up perfectly. I mean, yeah, I can't see any reason why not. My only point is that we've got it. You said that it's like in a resus machine the other day, and it was really poor, really poor. And the guy said, I said, yeah, but don't you have to do this HF stuff? Like, is there something weird about your device? Like, does it? And he was like, yeah, but it's so easy to skip through. And I'm like, and this is the thing. So it's embedded, but it's so easy to gloss over. So I'd be really loath to kind of re-implement that in other areas. But does the IT has a bigger impact, I think, in terms of care. And I'm shocked that it's not in that. But I don't think it's being done right in the areas where it's mandated at the moment.
That makes a lot of sense, and like you say, it kind of interface human factors. You can't separate the two. That's really insightful. Thank you.
I think we might be able to squeeze in one more question, and then I might suggest, Salah, if you want to maybe post it in the chat, your question, so that we can close on time, if that's okay. Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks, Chow. So great points from there. Thanks, both of you, for that presentation. I particularly liked your slide with the ambulances, and I'm always conscious that if you super automate one part of a complicated workflow, you've got to think about how that affects upstream and downstream. And if you've got lots of ambulances, that doesn't mean to say that the hospital is going to take the patients any faster. Your point, Nick, about the where of interacting with this product and trying to make a decision with another piece of information to process. I think that's really important for clinical users to get an idea of what it is they want the tool to do and how they want to interact with it. Sometimes it'll be the case to fully automate it. Sometimes you'll need to have a bit more personal interaction, and it's really important to get those balances right. Another point onto that, I heard a colleague from the States speaking a couple of weeks ago, pointing out in their territory, what would they do if they went against the recommendation of the AI, and what would be the litigious situation for that if it would obviously be recorded, and what if the person went against it and got it wrong? So really complicated things to think about. And then lastly, to Baptiste's last point, what we're finding, and I touched on in my introduction, it's still the case that it's not really clear what the evidence needs to look like about a lot of these things, and designing an RCT isn't necessarily the great way to rapidly transform a service at the pace that a software can develop. When you're, particularly in my case, talking about a 3-year interval breast screening program, where a decent study, you'd need to do your follow-up data for a whole round. So you'd have to be doing the data collection over 6 years with the bits before and after to do it. So you've really got to look at your whole evidence toolkit to build up what is the right way of doing it, and probably being a bit innovative even how you collect your evidence. And that's, I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think we've got 30 seconds. I'm sorry we didn't get through all the questions. It's fantastic. We could just keep going for those that want to. But it just goes to show how complicated it is, but also how interesting it is. For the breadth of questions, it covers so many different areas, from ethical right the way through to the implementation and the mental health space. And I like Ben's point there, whether the algorithm is going to be used to hit us over the head at a later date too. So, you know, all of those concerns. It's been a fantastic hour. Thank you so much for staying with us. Our next meeting is on the 17th of January at 6 o'clock. It's a change of day, so just to accommodate the speaker. So I'm hoping most of you can come and join us. It'll be Zoe Kurtzy from the Turing Fellow in the University of Cambridge, and a focus on mental health next time. So AI for better brain and mental health, which would be fantastic. That one last plea to please fill in the wee survey. It only takes a couple of minutes. And I wish you all a fantastic holiday season. Hope that everybody gets some really well-deserved time off. And if you are in Wales, then Nadolig Llawen. So Merry Christmas. Thanks ever so much for everybody speaking and contributing today, and questions and discussion. This is exactly what we want this group to do. It's a safe space, air views, ask questions, and contribute. So it's fantastic. And thanks to Zao and Nick as well. So I think that's it. Unless there's anything else, wonderful. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening. See you in January in the new year.